Life gets messy. Faith doesn't always feel steady. And sometimes the pain runs so deep, you wonder if God even sees you. If that's you, I see you. I've been there. And this show was created for people like us. We'll share the heartbreak, the flickers of hope, and the God who never walks away. This is Bare Faith, where raw faith and deep pain meet a relentless God.
Welcome back to Bare Faith. Our current series, Faith Beyond the Letdowns, is walking us through what happens after life does not turn out the way we prayed it would. We're naming the disappointment, sitting with it, and learning how faith survives when the outcome hurts. In last episode, we talked about the moment that plans fall apart. And today, we're going to stay there a little longer because what comes after the letdown is often the hardest part. And today's episode is called The Waiting Room of Faith because waiting is difficult. It's full of questions, second guessing, and that slow ache of unanswered prayers. It's where we wonder if God is still working or if we somehow missed our moment. Waiting has a way of testing more than our patience. It tests what we believe about God's character. It tests whether trust can exist without timelines, explanations, or visible progress. And waiting, it asks us to stay when everything in us wants resolution or relief. And Scripture does not rush us past this space. Psalm 27:14 tells us, "Wait for the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord." That verse is not a slogan. It's an invitation to a kind of strength that does not come from answers, but from staying anchored when answers have not arrived. So today, we're going to step into that waiting room together. Not to escape it quickly and not to pretend it's easier than it is. We are learning how faith matures here, how God forms endurance here, and how trust deepens when nothing seems to change. So if you're waiting for healing, for clarity, for restoration, or for something to finally make sense, just know you are not alone and you are not forgotten. So let's talk about what it means to wait without losing heart. And to do that, we're going to start by naming the ache. Because if we are all honest, unspoken waiting, it just seems to quietly erode our faith and trust. And it shows up when we stop asking God for the thing we still want. And it's not because we stop believing, but because saying it again feels worse than if we just stayed quiet. And it shows up when someone asks us for the 100th time for an update. And we're like, hey, there's nothing new. And we smile and we mean it. But deep down, we also wish that they had not asked. And it shows up in worship on Sundays when the lyrics talk about breakthroughs and we're mouthing the words, but we are not lifting our hands because we're entering self-protection mode. And it shows up when we replay that moment we were sure God was moving, and that prayer that felt different, and that sign we thought meant soon. And we run it back in our minds and we try to figure out where the story slowed down. And then it shows up when we scroll past answered prayers because we are not ready to celebrate someone else's ending while we're still stuck in the middle. But we keep showing up, don't we? And we keep doing what faith looks like. And the question we ask ourselves is, are we still trusting? Or are we just learning how to wait without expecting much? Psalm 27:14 does not tell us to hurry up and be strong. It tells us to wait and take courage. And what I've learned is courage looks less like confidence and more like staying when leaving would be way easier. And courage is not pretending and saying honestly to God, God, this is where I am, and this is the place I keep avoiding, and this is the prayer that I am tired of carrying alone. Our faith does not grow because the waiting ends. It grows because God meets us before the waiting ends. And sometimes the best way to understand that is to step into our story that looks a lot like ours. I want to share a story from a man I will call Mark. Mark's car idled in the driveway, its engine ticking down like a slowing heartbeat. And the box from work, it was taped and dented, heavier than it should be, sat in the passenger seat. And he pressed his hand to his forehead and he stared at the house. And he noticed, wow, it's the same porch, it's the same curtains, the same kitchen window. Everything looked untouched, but nothing felt right. And he wondered, how do you walk inside and tell the people you love that the ground just vanished beneath you? And he carried the box through the door like evidence of a crime. And the smell of dinner hit him. And his wife then looked up from the sink and smiled that soft smile she always saved for him. Mark told me that he managed to nod, and he decided he would tell her soon. He just couldn't tell her right then. Instead, he went to his office and sat in the chair, and he opened his laptop. And he told himself, I'll just take a look, one job board. And then that one job board became another, then another, and applications just flew out the window into the void. He said days folded into one another, and mornings he woke up already tired. And his afternoons just kind of blurred behind endless scrolling. And one evening he refreshed his inbox so many times, he said that the screen just seemed to mock him. And then another night he just stared at the ceiling, replaying every interview, every handshake that led to nowhere. He said Sundays were hard. He would usually stay in bed while the house was stirring around him, and he could hear kids laughing downstairs, and he could smell the coffee brewing. He said, but it was just like life was moving forward without permission. He said he wanted to pray, really pray. He said, but when he did, he said it was just so hard for him, and he could only manage, God, I trust you. But he said even then he heard the question mark at the end. And he said shame slipped in quietly after that. And then he'd scroll past his friends' posts, new jobs, promotions. He said, but each one felt like proof that he had been overlooked. And he felt like he was the only one left in the dark. Then one great afternoon, his phone buzzed, a text from a friend. The friend said, coffee? He said he stared into the screen, and in his head he said no 3 times because the ache had become comfortable and familiar, and it was so much easier if he just carried it alone. But his thumb moved anyway, and he was like, sure, 3 o'clock. But when he arrived at the cafe, the words just spilled out before he could stop them. And he said, it's not the silence that's killing me, he said. I'm just wondering, does any of this matter anymore? The prayers, the waiting, the showing up and doing everything when nothing changes. And his sweet friend didn't interrupt him or didn't offer quick fixes or Bible verses. He just listened to him. And Mark said that's when he remembered Psalm 27:14 about waiting for the Lord to be strong and to let his heart take courage. And he said it felt like someone was reaching out through the fog to hold his hand. He said courage wasn't certainty. He knew at that moment that courage was deciding to keep showing up. And fortunately for Mark, weeks later, a job finally came. It wasn't the dream one, but it was one that would cover what his family needed. Waiting had stretched him thin, but he realized that it had also rebuilt him, and he began to see the difference, and he started believing that God could act and he could trust him, even if he couldn't see God moving. And he realized that the waiting room wasn't punishment. It was where his faith grew and where it learned to breathe on its own. He told me that one quiet evening, his laptop closed for the first time in months. And he sat in his office and he prayed that same prayer he said he'd prayed 100 times. God, I don't know how much longer I can do this, but I will stay faithful and I will trust you. And he said in that pause, he just felt God whisper back to him, I never left you. And that's the waiting room of faith, where trust grows slowly in an ache, in the unanswered questions. In the ordinary mornings, you choose to get up anyway. That's where God meets us, often long before the circumstances ever change. And Mark's story is not an exception. Scripture gives us language for this kind of waiting too. And it's here that I want us to turn to Scripture. Not to someone rushing toward resolution, but to someone who lived most of her life inside the waiting. And her name is Anna. We meet her in Luke chapter 2, verses 36 through 38. Luke tells us she was married for 7 years, and then her husband died. And from that day forward, she lived as a widow, right up to the moment we encounter her at 84 years old. And that's an important remark, that she was 84 years old. Because in Anna's world, widowhood was not just grief, it was vulnerability. A woman's safety, provision, and place in society were tied to her husband or her family. And without that, life's options would narrow quickly. We don't get a mention of children. There's no mention of protection, just years that keep coming. And yet Anna did not disappear. Luke tells us she did not leave the temple. So just picture her there, the stone floors cold beneath her feet, oil lamps flickering as morning slips into night again. And Anna praying prayers she has prayed many times before, asking questions that will still have no answers. And Luke says she worshiped with fasting and prayer night and day. That does not mean that her faith felt strong. It means that her faith stayed and she clung to God. There was no angel that came to explain the delay, and no promise gets clarified, and no timeline is ever offered to Anna, just waiting. Until one ordinary day, Mary and Joseph walk in with a baby. And something in Anna knows. And Luke says she comes up at that very hour and she begins to give thanks to God, not because her losses disappear and not because her life rewinds, but because she sees the Christ. The promise does not erase the years she waited. It meets her inside them. And here is what we frequently miss. Luke calls Anna a prophetess. While the world may have seen her as a leftover, God entrusted her with recognition and witness of the Messiah. And Anna speaks to others who are waiting too, quietly and faithfully, as someone who understands what it costs to keep showing up. In Psalm 27:14 again, it says, "Wait for the Lord, be strong, let your heart take courage, wait for the Lord." Anna did not wait with certainty. She waited with presence. Like Mark at his kitchen table, whispering through the strain, "I'll stay, I'll trust you, God." And maybe that's where some of us are today. We're still praying, we're still showing up, still holding space for God in a life that has not turned out how we hoped. Waiting does not mean God has forgotten us. Sometimes it means He's working deeper than we can ever see. And Anna teaches us this. Faith does not always look like confidence. Sometimes it looks like staying. So, if waiting isn't a mistake and it's not a sign of failure, the question becomes practical. So, what do we actually do when waiting stretches longer than we expected, when our prayers feel unanswered, when changes feel slow, and where life just stays stuck in between what was and what we hope for? I want to give you 3 ways to live faithfully in the waiting room this week. You don't have to do all 3 of them. Just choose the one that meets you right where you are right now. So, option 1, stay with God. Anna did not stay because she felt hopeful. She stayed because she kept turning toward God with what she did not understand. So this week, just choose one simple way to orient yourself toward God again. Open up the scripture, read it for 5-10 minutes. Sit in the same chair every morning and say the same prayer. Not to force your faith, just to stay facing Him. And you can pray something simple as, God, I'm still here. I don't know what you're doing, but I'm turning to you again. Because waiting doesn't require clarity. All it needs is direction. And sometimes faith looks like choosing where you turn, even when nothing changes yet. Option number 2, just wait. Sometimes we just exhaust ourselves trying to make waiting productive. We try to fix it. We try to spiritualize it. We try to rush it. But Anna, she didn't decorate any of the waiting. She just lived inside of it. So this week, practice not rushing yourself emotionally. When impatience rises, notice it. And when frustration surfaces, name it. And when disappointment comes back around, don't shame yourself for it. Just turn to God and say, this is still hard, God, but I know you're still here. And just let waiting be waiting. Don't make it more than it is. Our faith grows when we stop pretending this season is something it is not. And option 3, speak hope. When Anna finally saw Jesus, she didn't keep it to herself. She spoke to others who were waiting too. The reality is, waiting isolates us. And one of the ways that faith matures is when we turn outward instead of turning inward. So this week, reach out to one person, send a text, make a call, sit with them and listen. You don't have to fix anything, and you don't have to explain to God. Just say, I know what it feels like to wait, and I want you to know you're not alone. Sometimes hope grows not because our situation changes, but because we let God use us right where we are standing. So you have 3 ways forward. Stay with God, just wait, and speak hope. These are not steps to escape the waiting. They're just ways to live faithfully inside it. So choose one. Stay oriented to God, let waiting be what it is, or speak hope to someone else who is waiting as well. Because faith does not disappear in the waiting room, it learns how to stay. Before we close, we need to name something essential. Waiting is not just something to endure. It's the place where Christ is with us. The great thing is, Jesus doesn't wait for us to have it all figured out. He steps into the middle of the wait. And He doesn't ask us to tidy our hearts, try to understand His timing, or force our faith to feel strong. He just meets us exactly where we are. Consider the demoniac of the Gerasenes. For years, he was isolated and tormented and desperate. No one could help him. And his life had been a long season of waiting. He was waiting for freedom, for relief, for someone just to see him. And then Jesus came. Not when it was convenient, but right in the middle of his suffering. And him waiting for so long, it didn't disqualify him from Jesus' presence. It became the moment when Jesus would show his power and presence. Or think of the crippled woman in Luke 13. She had been bent over for 18 years, unnoticed and marginalized, living each day in a season that never seemed to end. Yet Jesus called her forward. He didn't erase the years she had endured, but he met her in them. Her waiting did not block his touch. It became the very context in which restoration appeared. Or consider the two blind men in Matthew 20. They had persisted in calling out despite the crowd trying to quiet them. And their voices, it just carried the weight of longing and hope deferred. And our gracious Lord, he stopped and he asked, "What do you want me to do for you?" Their faith was persistent, and their waiting, it intersected with his presence, and sight came. These stories remind us that waiting is not a sign of absence. It's a space where God's presence often arrives quietly, unexpectedly, and powerfully. So our waiting is not wasted. It's the rehearsal of faith and patience and trust. And maybe tonight your waiting just feels endless. And maybe your prayers echo unanswered. Or maybe your hope is stretched thin. But hear this. Jesus steps into the middle of your waiting room. Not to rush you through and not to fix everything, but just to meet you in the ache, in the silence, in the ordinary places you think no one notices. And he whispers, "I see you, I'm here, and I haven't forgotten you." The waiting is not wasted. The pause is not empty. If we allow it, the waiting, it deepens our faith and our courage grows and hope takes root. Because the same Christ who stopped for the blind, the broken, and the bent over stops for you tonight, meeting you where you are and turning the waiting itself into a place of encounter. And when you leave this waiting room, take this truth with you. Faith does not require immediate answers. Waiting doesn't mean God is absent. In fact, the God who stays meets us most powerfully in the pause, in the quiet, in the seasons we just can't rush. If today's episode hit the quiet ache of waiting, I want to invite you into a journey I've been working on. My new devotional, Chasing Emptiness, Finding Fullness, releases February the 3rd. And over 45 days, it walks alongside you through scripture, reflection, and journaling, helping you experience God's presence, peace, and joy, even when life feels paused, uncertain, or heavier than you expected. And you don't have to wait until release to start reading. Scan the QR code and you'll receive a free chapter and be the first to get the pre-order link. I hope this devotional reminds you that God is present even when answers are delayed, even when life isn't moving the way you planned. Thanks for joining me today, and I hope you come back next week as we dive into When Life Feels Unfair. Have a blessed day.